Hello everyone and welcome to this very special PJTV series on parenting. I'm your host, Stephen Kruiser. Let's meet today's panelists. First up is Katie Hurley, licensed clinical social worker. Katie is a child and adolescent psychotherapist, speaker, author, and parent. We also have Cheryl Eskin, a marriage and family therapist as well as a proud parent of two. Cheryl is the program director for the Teen Line in Los Angeles, which provides counseling and outreach for teenagers. And joining us from Ohio is Paula Bolyard. Paula is the supervising editor for the PJ Media parenting site as well as an author and parent. Also joining us from Dallas, Texas is PJTV contributor and our old friend and parent, Scott Ott. Today's topic is children and cell phones. We'll discuss when they should get their first cell phone and how to monitor their activity. Let's start with some statistics first, though. Recent studies show that approximately 80% of teens between the ages of 12 and 17 own a cell phone, and of those, half own a smartphone. That number is almost double what it was 2 years ago, double what it was in 2 years. Parents are offering their children cell phones at younger ages than ever before. So how young is too young? Paula, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, Stephen, let me start by throwing another statistic into this mix, that 9 out of 10 adults have cell phones. So when we're talking about whether a child, whether a teenager, whether anybody needs a cell phone, I would say that you need a cell phone if you're going to be somewhere where you can't reach civilization. Let's say you're out driving on a deserted road where you can't reach someone if you drive into a ditch, or if you fall into a well and Lassie's not available to come and rescue you. So a child who's at soccer practice, you know, there are going to be 9 out of 10 adults at that soccer practice or at the school. Somebody's going to have a cell phone. So there probably is not going to be an emergency where your child needs a cell phone. A lot of families like to have cell phones because it's a convenience for the parents, because it's easier to get a text message saying, come pick me up from soccer practice, than having to sit at soccer practice or go to the soccer games. So sometimes it's a convenience for the parents to have one, or they'd rather have a GPS tracker on their kids to know where they are all the time than have a conversation about where are you going and who are you going to be with. So, you know, the question is, do they need one? At what age do they need one? I would say when they're going somewhere where they can't reach an emergency services without a cell phone. So, you know, when they're working, when they're driving on their own, when they're independent.
Katie, I'm dying to know your answer to this. At what age do you think a kid can be responsible to have his or her own cell phone? I mean, away from the parent with it.
Well, honestly, that's a kid-by-kid basis, right? I mean, you can have a 9-year-old who's really responsible and a 15-year-old who's totally irresponsible. So, I mean, there's not really a magic age for it. Does a 9-year-old need a cell phone? Probably not, although I would say work with a lot of kids whose parents are divorced, and those come in handy for when kids are going back and forth between houses, when they're missing dad and not able to see dad, or missing mom on the other end, you know, and they can send a text and be in communication. I think that's a good thing. I'm a fan of the family line, instead of just handing over cell phones to kids because they reach some magic age, saying, all right, here's our extra family line, and if you need it for whatever reason, you can have access to it, but you don't need to have it with you at all times.
You kept blinking never in Morse code the whole time.
Well, you know, we should all move to the prairie probably and just start over. But
listen, you both brought up something so far. Many parents say that the cell phone is almost a necessity for children now because of the aforementioned sporting events and club activities. They're playing a larger part in children's lives. They need to be able to communicate with their children at a moment's notice, and a cell phone is the most obvious solution. Paula, do you agree with this logic?
Well, you know, I'm thinking back to when I was a kid or a teenager, and my parents would hand me a quarter and say, call if you're going to be late. And there were pay phones around, and the only suitable excuses for being late would be I'm lying in a ditch somewhere and bleeding out, in which case I really couldn't get to the pay phone, but you know, we never really discussed that. But I never actually had to use that quarter because the consequences of being late were actually worse than, you know, lying in a ditch bleeding out somewhere. But you know, now parents feel like they need to touch bases with their kids throughout the day. They can't go an hour without talking to their kids. and touching bases with them. What grade did you get on the test? What happened at your soccer practice? Who said what to whom? And, you know, I question whether that's really a healthy thing to be constantly keeping tabs on your kids. I would prefer to not do that. I understand things have changed. You don't go to soccer practice in your backyard anymore. You don't go to baseball games at the neighborhood park. People are in travel leagues, and those are in another city, and the schedules are so much more complicated now than they were when I was a kid. And so there is a greater need to touch bases on things. But then, you know, by the other token, you need to question, are our schedules too complicated? And is that why we need to have, you know, so many devices and keep in touch all the time? And so you have to find a balance in there somewhere of, you know, are we making our lives too stressful? And that's why we need to touch bases so much. So with all things, I think you have to find your family's balance.
Finding that balance. Scott, let's go to you. Do you think it's valuable as a way to, you know, to corral the family, corral the kids, keep tabs on them when they're off of practice doing this? Or do you think maybe, hey, they can just borrow somebody else's phone? Do you think it's a necessity, or is there a workaround?
Hey, last night my son's phone was at the Microsoft store getting repaired, and this shows how smart I am. I was going to go pick up my son from the church youth group, and then we were going to go to the mall to get his phone back. So I show up outside of the church youth group meeting place, and I text my son that I'm here. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Meanwhile, you know, somebody at the Microsoft store is probably looking at the phone going, oh, good, he's there. So, you know, I think I like Katie's idea of having that sort of loaner phone in the house that says, if you're going to be in a situation where you need a phone because of an urge, you know, you'll be out of contact, or you have to call us when it's time to pick you up, then here's the phone you use for that. And that gives the kids an opportunity to learn how to be responsible with a phone before they have one that's their own. I remember a situation, as Paula was talking about, when I was at school and I had an after-school activity. I missed the bus home, okay, my own fault, and there's nothing you can do about that. So I had to go to this payphone, call my grandmother, and say, I missed the bus, to which she says, well, Pop's not going to be home from work in Philadelphia for another hour, so if you want to start walking, you can, and when he gets here, I'll tell him where you are. So I think there was something actually healthy about that, because you had to be responsible. You had to find a way to deal with it when you were irresponsible.
I was just remembering some things from my youth that I won't bring up here. Many people argue that giving their children cell phones actually increases the communication between the parent and the child in today's busy world. Whether it's texting a simple I love you or sending a snap of a great report card to mom and dad, cell phones allow for instantaneous communication that would otherwise not exist. On the flip side, cell phones also hinder family interaction in the household as children get sucked into mobile games, apps, and chatting with friends. Cheryl, does it really foster any, is the net gain on this a big upside if it's handled properly, fostering a gain in communication, or is it just the parent trying to rationalize?
I think it's a combination of the two. I mean, I think it's important what Paula said, that I think parents are sometimes in too much communication with their kids, too much micromanaging their kids' lives. There's a book out recently, How to Raise an Adult. I mean, a lot of our teens are going off to college and don't really have the skills to succeed in the world because we're so involved in their lives at such a young age and continuing through their adolescence. So I think there is a healthy medium where they don't need to, I think it can be great for communicating an I love you, or like Katie said, with divorced parents, or just keeping track of where your kids are. But I don't think it needs to be every moment of every day, or text me at recess, or text me at lunch, or let me know all of that. I don't think that part is healthy.
In a larger urban setting, though, Katie, do you think, it's not like we always talk about the old days and the more family time and everything, but people were in smaller geographic locations then, too. Now things are spread out, especially when you get into a big city. Your kids, like my kid's 14 miles away from me right now. And, and that's close in LA. Right. So is it more helpful for that? I mean, is it like maybe something you adapt to? Is it maybe better in an urban setting than it is in a smaller town? Do you think it's helpful then?
I do, but I think for teenagers, it's different when you're talking about little kids versus teenagers. I think it can be helpful for teenagers to have that phone. And for some kids, I've treated a lot of kids with different kinds of anxiety. It's kind of one of my specialties. And I think sometimes having a lifeline, even if they don't use it, but knowing that they have it can be useful. So I really encourage parents to treat it on a kid-by-kid basis and, what is the need? And, but being that far apart from parents, we joke about payphones, but there aren't many payphones around anymore. We were in Manhattan Beach a few weeks ago after church getting a donut, and my daughter was like, "Mom, you have to see this thing. What is it?" It's like they're not around. They're not as readily available, and even if they are there, half of them are broken. So, I don't know. It's everything's balanced, but that's why I think that the family line works, because you have it when you need it, but you don't have to have it all the time.
The last time we ran into a payphone, my daughter took a picture of it and posted it on Facebook.
Right, it's retro.
It was so weird. It's like, well, look at history. Now when we delve a little deeper into the world of cell phones, things become a bit more complicated. Cell phones, while great for connecting families, also connect children to a wide world of temptations and dangers. As a parent, it's our job to protect children from them. Katie, what are some of the steps parents can take to monitor their child's habits while not appearing to be invasive?
Well, just you buy your kid a phone, you own the phone. So you have to be honest with them and say, this is how to use a phone responsibly. This generation of parents, we're always giving kids things and walking away without giving them instructions.
Great point.
And, cell phones should come with instructions. There should be guidelines and there should be boundaries about when it's appropriate to use it, and not having it in the bedroom at night, and, not hiding out in some closet somewhere and getting involved in some group text. if kids are doing secretive behaviors, we need to be aware of that and trying to figure out what that means. But I think if we have healthy boundaries, if we have healthy relationships with our kids, when we talk to them openly and honestly, then they're less likely to do that. And if we also monitor our own behavior and our own, social media use with our phones and stuff. My kids are little and they have no business knowing anything about social media, but because other kids at school know about Facebook and Instagram, mine come home saying, "What's Facebook and Instagram?" So I have really honest conversations with them, and I say to them, "I'll never post a picture of you online without asking you first." And that's true. I'll say to my daughter, "Oh, this is a cool shot I took of you in the woods. Can I post that, or do you not want me to post that?" I think when we do things like that, we teach kids that it's important to think of other people and how to use phones appropriately.
Always the other kids that are screwing things up.
You can't send them anywhere.
My whole approach was to have an only child and never expose her to other human beings. And then
it backfired.
Paula, what do you think about this? A lot of parents would say a parent has the right to, we're worried about calling it spying or snooping or anything, but a lot of parents would just say, "I've got a right to spy or snoop on my kid's phone." Do you think that's true? Do you think you have a right to spy on your kid, or do you think it's just something? Do you think it's something that's effective ahead of time, or should you just wait until there's a reason to do it? And do you think parents have a right to do it?
I had this conversation with my husband last night, and we kind of believe that, in a family you shouldn't have secrets. It's not healthy to have secrets in a family. So with my husband and I, we've been married 26 years, and we know each other's passwords and logins. I can pick up his phone and look at his text if I wanted to, or look at his email, and he can look at mine, and we don't have secrets between us. And we feel like that gives us a little bit of accountability. We don't do it. I don't pick up his cell phone regularly and look at it, but he knows that I can if I want to. And we have those same rules with our kids, and especially when we own the phone, we pay for the phone. They're adults now, so we don't have to do that anymore. But, they always knew that at any given time we could pick up their phone, look at their texts, and look at their history and see who they're calling. We didn't do it regularly. We kind of spot checked it, but, we didn't feel it was a healthy thing for them to have a secret life. Again, going back in the Wayback Machine, it used to be there was a central phone in the family, and everybody in the family could listen because there was only one line, and everybody would listen to one half of the conversation. So you didn't really have an expectation of privacy. Or if you had another extension, mom or dad could always pick it up and find out who you were talking to. And we don't have those layers of protection anymore with cell phones. And, I think we do need some sort of accountability. So I think kids need to know that they really should not have an expectation of privacy. And, it's a good lesson for them to learn, too, that when somebody else is paying for something, that there are strings attached. I think that's a good life lesson for kids.
Scott, technology changes so quickly now that you probably have a variety of experiences just from what happened with your oldest child to the 17-year-old now regarding these kinds of things, regarding technology and cell phones and privacy. What have you noticed? Is it different? Did you learn anything along the way on how to handle it better with your 17-year-old? Tell us about that.
Well, I'm not sure that I learned because I'm a pretty slow learner, but they learned. And one of the things they learned is that once, for example, somebody has a Facebook account, well, then why? Well, it's unfair if everybody doesn't have a Facebook account. And so the pressure as a parent to grant favors to the next child and the next child, we have 4 children, and the next child down becomes pretty intense. They're like, oh, everybody but I have a Facebook account now. Why is it that I'm the only person in this household who can't do that? So we set that expectation early on, and we said, look, it's certainly not going to happen. I forget what the age was. It may have been 14 or 16. I forget what it was. Anyway, but there was that expectation where we said it's not going to happen until then. And then we made a big deal about when it did happen, and we said, look, your mom and dad are going to be your first friends on Facebook, and here's how we're going to do this. And so I think the technology changes, but relationship between parents and children doesn't change. And the principles of being open with your kids, like Paula and her husband have, we have this similar guidelines with me and my wife. And so my children understand that we have set in place accountability guidelines for ourselves. And so it makes total sense that we would do the same thing for the children.
Cheryl, I want to piggyback onto something Paula said and ask you about it here. She was talking about, you sit down and you explain to the kids, the parents, and we alluded to this in another episode too, parents don't always have privacy either. Right. Now, a parent doesn't have to justify everything a parent does to the child. That's the parents who want to be their kids' friends kind of err on that side way too much. But is it beneficial in things like this to go, look, my phone's lying around, other people can look at it sometimes. There's really no such, is it a good idea to just teach them there's no such thing as privacy really anyway, and even adults don't really have any online and they should just treat it as such?
100%. I definitely agree. I think that should be started. We give kids kind of like what Katie said. To drive a car, you have to do driver's ed, you have to take a test, you have to do all these things. We hand over these phones without really explaining it sometimes. And I think that is a problem. I think that's something we all need to work on, is explaining the nature of privacy. Once you put it out there, it is out there. And yeah, the same consequences happen for us. Some of it, we have to be careful what we write in an email because our boss or a friend could get forwarded to the wrong person. Same thing with leaving your phone laying around. I know we all have an embarrassing story or something that we've sent the text to the wrong person or left the phone laying out and someone saw the wrong thing. I think kids learn sometimes by hearing our stories instead of lecturing at them, of just even saying, this crazy thing happened to me today. I sent a text to the wrong person. It was so embarrassing. What I'm learning from this, and has that ever happened to you? I think that's a really good way to open the dialogue with our kids sometimes.
Yeah, I lost my phone, and everybody, this is a reason why you should put a password on it, because I lost my phone, and everybody was, I woke up one day at a political conference, and there were a lot of tweets that weren't from me.
I think it's important to let them know.
Yeah, that was the last time I ever left it lying around without it being locked up. Cheryl, as someone who works so closely with teens on the teen line, how do teens balk at any sort of monitoring, or do they find comfort in it sometimes? Are we forgetting about that? Do they always like, Mom, get away, Dad, get away? Or do they think, oh, good, they're still watching over me?
I think it depends on the age. When they're 12, 13, 14, I think they need more supervision. As they're getting older, they're getting towards college, they're getting towards being out of the house, I think we need to give them a little more autonomy. But I think it's the nature of teens to balk at being monitored. And that's part of, and we were like that as teens too. That being said, I still think there are limits in place, there are expectations. We have to look at, if we're snooping on our kids' technology, I think we need to look at, why are we doing this? Are we doing this because we're concerned about something they're doing or saying or the way they're acting? Or are we doing it because we want to be too much of their friends? We want to see what's going on, what's the new gossip between them and their friends. I think that's an important thing for us to decide.
That's a weird part of this landscape, isn't it, Katie, since it's all brand new right now? A lot of this is really about the parents. Mm-hmm. It's not just about what we're dealing with the kids, how we're dealing with the kids. There's some stuff from our adolescence or something bubbling up into these things.
Absolutely,
and how does,
winging it.
What does a parent have to look at? We're talking about how to monitor the kid, how to look at them. What does a parent have to do to maybe step back and say, okay, am I doing this? Am I doing that? What should a parent look to him or herself for as red flags?
Well, I always say to parents when they come to my office and they're overly concerned about, phone use and online behavior and all that stuff, I always say, well, what is your biggest worry really? What is your concern? Because I think we tie everything up, our own emotions, and we assume that our kids are going through the same things that we went through as adolescents, and that's not true. Everybody's different, and everybody experiences things differently. So I think we do need to check ourselves in the mirror and wonder why we feel the need to know everything that they're thinking and saying at all times. I mean, when I was an adolescent, you got to have a diary. My mom never read a diary that I wrote in, or a journal, or whatever we called it, to make it sound cool, but it essentially was a diary. But I was allowed to have that space and write things down and not fear. It never occurred to me that she would be reading it. I don't believe she ever did. I never asked, and it never occurred to me that she would. But now we think, because things are digital, that we have to be watching all the time. I just think we need to be more honest with kids, and we need to be honest with ourselves about what it is that we really want to know.
Yeah, and you don't really want to know what. Even the people you love the most, you really don't want to know what they're thinking all the time.
No, I think we're afraid they'll feel left out. We're afraid that they're either left out, or we're afraid that they're behaving badly. And, the truth is, we can't control everything, and we have to stop trying to control everything, because that doesn't help our kids grow up.
Yeah. Finally, phones and education are a current hot-button topic. Many schools loathe cell phones and see them as both a distraction and a possible tool for cheating, which they probably are. Other schools see them as a technological asset and are looking for new ways to integrate them into daily curriculum. Paula, where do you fall on this issue, and how much should the schools actually monitor this kind of thing or get involved?
Well, if you look back at it, you think about the founders, and I don't think anybody would argue that kids today are getting a better education than our founders had. And they did that largely with books made from dead trees. They didn't have cell phones, they didn't have tablets, they didn't have laptop computers, and they did that all with dead trees. And if you think about it, the basics of education, reading, writing, arithmetic, studying literature, all those things did not require any kind of technology, and they still don't. We still teach reading the same way, phonics basically. We still teach the multiplication facts the same way. Drill, baby, drill. So those things haven't changed, and we throw around the term 21st century education as if the basics of education have changed because we turned the corner on a new century, but they really haven't. Those things haven't changed. That said, we can use technology. We can use a fun app to drill the math facts. We can use a fun computer game to reinforce phonics. So we don't have to be afraid of those technologies. I think we just, again, going back to balance, not allowing them to take over for other things or take the place of genuine teaching in basic subject matter, and not allowing them to replace the teacher, but using them as tools to enhance learning, I think.
Scott, it's mostly the parents' responsibility, not the school's responsibility. You never want to really call for the school getting heavily involved in this, that, or the other, because in reality you need to deal with it at home first. But there probably should be some sort of more coherent on-campus monitoring of cell phone interaction, don't you? Because I'm starting to lean that way. I'm not always a big let the school come down. But then again, I did go to school with none, so I'm not opposed to that either. But do you think schools should get a little more involved in monitoring, so the kids can't be doing whatever they want on the phones all the time?
I think the nature of the model of education that we're using, which is still a very industrial model of education, makes cell phones little more than a distraction. I mean, as Paula pointed out, there are a few things you can do with them that would be integrated in the curriculum, but for the most part, they are trouble. As you suggested, they're easy to cheat with. I used to be executive director of a Christian children's camp, and for years they had walkie-talkies that the teenagers who were the leaders at the camp would use to communicate with each other and say, okay, now we're moving to the pond, we're going to the swimming pool or whatever. So after a while, we began to realize, hey, everybody has a cell phone. Why don't we let the top leaders keep their phones with them and they can communicate, but everybody else has to check their phones at the door before they go out with the kids. And I remember walking into a room one day. There's a worship service going on at this Christian children's camp, and in the back of the room, there are two staff members sitting next to each other, texting each other. so that they could have a conversation back and forth while this was going on. So I think it's tough under the model of education that we're now using. Now, if we went to a more portfolio-driven, project-driven model with a lot more independence on the kids' part, and the telephones actually became part of the job, in essence, where you had to actually have real responsibility, I could see that it would make sense to have them there.
Katie, how about you? Do you think there's an eventual upside to cell phones in the classroom, or are you bringing the Hurley hammer down on this one?
Well, I might surprise you with this one because I recently spoke at the Kingswood Oxford School in Connecticut, and they are a very tech-forward school. And I actually went there. It's a private high school I went to, and a lot has changed in the last 20 years. And I think they've done an amazing job in a lot of ways on a lot of different fronts. They've changed their whole model of education. They've changed a lot of things. And one thing they've done is they're saying, you know what, we can't control this. They're going to be doing it under the desk, or they can put it on top of the desk, and we can find a way to, when it's appropriate, use the phones as part of the curriculum, let the kids use them and draw it all together. So I think there's a balance in there somewhere. I was telling Cheryl earlier that my daughter goes to this very small private school, and they are no tech, and my son goes to the public school in El Segundo, and they're pretty high tech. And I don't really like either. I don't care for either model, to be perfectly honest, because I think my daughter, being in 3rd grade, could stand to type in school during school hours sometimes. I believe that if you don't teach kids to do things properly, they learn bad habits. So I wish she was getting more of that at school, and I didn't have to be making her learn to type at home, but that's what it is. And with him, I see sometimes wasted hours in the computer lab where they're doing, the Raz Kids reading program is good for some kids. For him, it's boring because he's a good reader. But then they go on these other websites where they play math games, and I don't really see the value of those. And then you've got 20 little 1st graders staring at screens until their eyes fall out for 45 minutes. And I don't really think that that's appropriate either. So I think, if you could meet in the middle, you could find a happy medium, and there's a way to bring technology into the schools and make it work. But I think that we got some schools doing nothing and some schools doing everything, and I'm not sure that that's working.
Cheryl, do you think that medium can be found anytime soon, or is all of this technology changing so quickly, it's all so new? Do you think it's just going to be a hiccup process for a generation now, or do you think that we can start to actually navigate and find these happy mediums soon?
I'd like to think we can. I really do. I think there's a lot of power in technologies. There's a lot of things we can harvest well. And I think schools are where we educate our kids. Home as well. But I think I love the Kingsford Oxford model, that they're showing them how to use the phones responsibly. We're not saying they're not using phones, but let's figure out how to use it in a way that makes sense. So I think schools, if they're willing to commit to this project, can find a happy medium and a happy balance.
The only thing I'm hoping for in education soon is that cell phones, tablets, I don't care what they are, get rid of the old textbook model, because that's ridiculous and it's a ripoff when you get to college. There's no reason a kid should be paying $200 for a book just because it was revised 5 times by the professor. Okay. That's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our wonderful panel for joining us. Thank you, Paula, very much for being here. You can read more of Paula's insightful thoughts on pjmedia.com/parenting. I'd also like to thank my friend Scott Ott for being with us today. You can see more of Scott right here with me and others on PJTV. A big thanks to Cheryl Eskin for participating today. Visit teenline.org for more information on this amazing support service that's available. Lastly, I'd like to thank Katie Hurley for being here today. Visit practicalkatie.com for more thoughts from her on parenting issues. Thank you all, and don't forget to check out our other episodes in this Kids and Technology Parenting series on pjtv.com. For everyone here at PJTV, I'm Stephen Kruiser, and I'd like to thank you all for watching.